The petrochemical industry plays a major role in the Texas economy, the 10th largest in the world. But how does pollution they create impact nearby communities? Find out what this activist wants to do to protect residents. Next on Living Smart.
Production funding for Living Smart with Patricia Gross is underwritten in part by Halliburton.
Hello, I'm Patricia Gross. Welcome to Living Smart, the show designed to help you get the most out of life. Today's guest, environmentalist Juan Parras, shares his experience on how he fights to get justice for communities in need and what you should know to save the planet and yourself.
There's a leak at this plant right here, and it's right next to the fence line of the Manchester community where we've been working with those folks. Buenos días. La venimos a invitar a una junta, ¿eh? ¿Cómo les fue a ustedes ayer?
Bien malo, nos
¿Sí?
enfermamos.
They got sick. Hey, look, we're going to have another meeting.
Where's this going to be at?
It's going to be at the Cesar Chavez High School.
Juan Parras and his son Brian are on a mission to educate and protect these citizens. A leak of sulfur dioxide has many in this neighborhood sick and in fear. It's an incident all too familiar to the residents in this Manchester barrio. The people here live right next door to many of the industrial plants that line the Houston Ship Channel. Each day they're exposed to toxic pollutants escaping from these companies.
Each one of these points shows an admitted source of pollution of one type. And it starts here at the Houston Ship Channel, and it goes all the way to the Galveston Bay.
The Texas economy is the 10th largest in the world, and the petrochemical industry plays a significant role in that.
Get your camera. I will.
Juan Parras is a community activist who wants the companies to own up to their civic responsibility in protecting the health of nearby communities.
Most of the chemical plants, in fact, from the Houston Ship Channel all the way to Galveston Bay are grandfathered plants. They are still operating and running their facilities based on all environmental laws and not on recent environmental laws regarding emissions. They could be reducing their emissions of toxic chemicals into the air if they had the best available control technology, but most of them do not.
Parras knows he has an uphill fight, but he's gone through these battles before. A few years ago in Louisiana, he helped organize a protest against a polyvinyl chloride plant. His work there made national news.
Shintech wanted to build a $700 million facility on top of an African-American community, already surrounded by other chemical plants. So we were the first, community that the EPA decided in favor of. This is the kind of banners we had at the Capitol, right there in the steps of Baton Rouge. PVC, the poison plastic. You can really see the chemical plants in the background.
The day Parras heads Texas, Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services. His mission is to empower communities and give them the tools to affect legislation. One of his more recent projects is Chavez High School.
We have a brand new high school built predominantly for Latino children, 1,000 feet from some of the worst polluters in the state of Texas and in the whole nation.
According to a Houston Chronicle article in Harm's Way, nowhere in Houston are the toxic air levels higher than in this neighborhood. Part of the problem is that the most lenient benchmarks for airborne carcinogens in the entire country are right here in Harris County.
There's not enough politicians with political will to make industry clean up because they always claim that this is needed on behalf of the country. We want to really advocate for the communities that are being impacted by environmental degradation with no strings attached. I need your help, man.
Parras was born into a low-income Mexican family of 10. He grew up in Big Spring, Texas, and learned the value of family and education from his parents. Early on, he showed promise and was offered a full scholarship to a seminary school.
Let me mark it over here, mijo.
This would change his life forever.
Hey, Father, how you doing?
Hey, good to see you.
Father Bill Davis was one of his teachers.
The main purpose of the school was leadership. When I taught high school, everything was human rights. I got my kids involved in human rights. And of course the Kennedy brothers were killed at that time, and so, you know, all of a sudden you become angry.
Hey Jay, I wanted to show you the Superfund site.
Parras is angry about environmental injustice.
What we mean by a Superfund site is the worst type of contamination that we have according to EPA standards.
He sees his mission to be a mentor and advocate to the next generation of foot soldiers getting ready to take on the struggle.
And this area is 36 acres of land contaminated with lead-contaminated, arsenic, heavy metals.
You still have this tile back here, Dad?
Yeah, mijo, I've been wanting to put it up, and I think it's about time. So it's all recycled stuff.
Parras wants young people to realize they can affect change in their communities. His favorite disciple is son Brian.
You know, for someone like my age who's looking at that particular type of work, it's frustrating because you feel like you're not getting anywhere. No progress is being made. It takes a whole lifetime to make progress. And so that, I think, would be the most important thing that I have learned from him, that you can't give up. You got to keep going at those issues. And eventually, you know, the right people will come across you and help the community.
Okay, gracias. Thank you. Bye.
Juan Parras, thank you so much for joining us here. It's great to have you.
Thank you for the invite.
Environmental justice, how do you define that?
Well, it's not so much how I define it, but what Executive Order 12898 says. It's the fair treatment of all people, regardless of race and ethnicity, and it's in reference to pollution.
Now, why is it that it seems sometimes that there's a disconnect between how people see the environment and themselves? You know, the environment is something out there. So when you're talking about the environment, how do you talk to them?
Well, and I'm glad you said that there's a tremendous disconnect, because a lot of people do not think that they have any impact on the environment. So there is a disconnect, but the way I see it is that we have to educate people that their lives, their actions, and everything they do has definitely an impact on the environment. And that's a learning curve that you just have to get out there and do all you can to at least get people on, to start realizing.
To start thinking about it, that it affects all of us. You take people on toxic tours in the neighborhood. Tell me about the toxic tours and what role they play in kind of motivating people about the environment.
The toxic tours are primarily, again, intended to educate, because even when you live in a given community and you've been there too long, you get used to maybe toxic exposures, you know, the chemical exposures that come from the refineries. You get used to the train noises, and you get used to some kinds where there's a lot of trash in neighborhoods. So the tour is to actually point those issues out and let them know that they don't have to live like that, and we don't have to put up with that, because there's other communities that are better off than our communities, but they have to take action. In other words, don't get used to it, because you don't have to.
Right. Now, give me an example, because you shared one time in a toxic tour something that happened. When they saw a fence, you know, they saw one side of the fence one way and the other where the toxic airs were coming in.
Well, what we always talk about is that, you know, pollution has no boundaries. That's right. And it doesn't stop at the fence line. You know, pollution that travels all over the place, but a lot of people, and primarily industry, you know, anytime you'll see a newscast, they'll say, you know, pollution has been contained within the company, and making it seem like it did not go beyond the fence line. And that's what we also have to try to convince people, that pollution is not confined. It travels, tremendously distance, even up as far as to the Antarctic.
What are some of the direct consequences of these people living in these contaminated or polluted neighborhoods?
Well, there was a recent study that just came out that says that if you live within a 2-mile radius of the petrochemical industries, that chances are that there's a 56% higher risk of you getting some kind of leukemia, you know, which is a form of cancer. So the risks are tremendous if you live pretty close to the chemical plants.
What about people who live away from those neighborhoods, far away? Do you think they realize how that affects them, or is it just out there?
I think the farther you live from the chemical plants, the less you are likely to think about pollution, because you think it doesn't have an impact on you. But again, studies have indicated that the ozone that initially starts in the east end travels all the way up to Kingwood and travels up to Fort Bend County. So those communities have to realize that, you know, again, we have a traveling sort of pocket of air that is not stable. And because it's not immediately, you know, as far as distance, they're not right next to it. They think that it doesn't exist.
Right, and we're interconnected,
yes,
even if we're not on that neighborhood. What action can people take as citizens if they live in these communities? What can they do?
Well, if there's a nuisance or there's an odor or there's a chemical spill, what they can do is they can call the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. That's the state regulator for environmental laws. They can call Harris County Pollution Control. That's another source. They can call the City Air Quality Board. But then the ultimate thing to do is if it's something that continues and is persistent and it's always there, maybe they need to call the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and file a complaint with them so that the EPA, then the federal government, will have to step in and investigate.
And that starts a process.
Yes.
Now, we saw your work in Louisiana, and you were successful. I'm sure it took a while. But what actions can you take with corporations to bring them along, to help them come along and help in this process? Because I'm sure they don't want to hurt people either.
Well, the best action that I found is that communities really have to be organized, and they have to get the politicians to support their efforts in cleaning up the air. And then that way you actually bring the corporate industry into a meeting where you have all the stakeholders involved. And by that time you have enough data, or you can collect enough research where you can say, hey, look, we don't know, we're not blaming you for all this cancer that we have in our community. We're not blaming you for all this asthma, but we think there may be a relationship here.
Right.
And so you try to get them to that point. And if it works, you know, then they'll reduce their admissions, or there will be other studies that confirm what the community has always expected, or industries left to trying to defend themselves against the community.
Now, let's talk about another thing that I've read about corporations in trying to, I don't know, in a way limit protests with gifts to the community or, you know, jobs and that sort of thing. How do you battle with that?
Well, the question of jobs in the environment, it's always an issue. It's an issue with the workers that are in the plant because they always think that environmentalists are trying to, you know, shut down the chemical plants or the industries. But it's also an issue with the community because the community also maybe is supported, like you said, in gifts, in scholarships, free meals, Christmas, you know, Christmas parties and whatnot. But industry uses that as a leverage, in my opinion, to kind of pacify the people that we are a good neighbor, we are trying to reduce emissions, and we're also giving back to the community. And I think it's not financially a huge amount for them to spend because it in turn is a good investment for them.
But what works in dealing with that? I mean, how do you educate people and say, look, yes, this is important, the jobs are important, the scholarships are important, but we have to find a middle ground here?
Well, what it does is it keeps you from actually arguing a certain point.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate people that just because you're given something doesn't mean that you have to tolerate the abuse or the neglect or the environmental pollutions in your community, because it's actually a token for a very insignificant health threat to that community. Because if you're poor and you're low income and your child has leukemia, like we've shown that there's cases of leukemia, you know, to treat that individual is going to be in the millions. And to get a scholarship is not going to take care of that $1 million debt. To get a bicycle is not going to take care of that. So we have to teach them that, look, it's a give and take situation, but you have to take more than you get.
You know, there are many states that have low pollution standards around the country. Texas is one of them. Do you think if they raise those standards and there were penalties for noncompliance, things would get better? Or what has worked and what has not worked in our city and in our state?
Well, I think that we do need to raise the standards, and I think that's a given right now in view of the fact that we're having a lot of children that have leukemia within a 2-mile radius. But the other thing is that when you raise the standards, it would be good if we even met the standards that California has, because the state of California has always been very progressive in dealing with environmental issues that have an impact on the health and safety of individuals. And if all the other states were to kind of emulate that, you know, we would be way ahead of the system right now.
Now, why do you care so much about this? I mean, you're helping people you don't even know.
Well, it's not so much that, people are benefiting from our efforts, but the problem is that for the last, I guess, since the Clean Air Act was passed, our state still continues to grandfather facilities. Our politicians still continue to do whatever industry does and has actually taken very little issue with the health and safety of our citizens. And I believe that somebody needs to be speaking out on behalf of communities. And I don't do it because I think I should be the one, but I do it because I am a citizen that is impacted by all this pollution. And I smell it daily, and I see it daily, and I see other people affected by it. So that's why I do it.
You've had some victories in your career, and I know, as your son says, Brian says, it takes a long time. You have to be persistent. But what are some of the factors, do you think, that led to your successes and that lead to your success now as an environmentalist?
Well, when it comes to community organizing, it's not an issue that is done overnight. That's why I said persistence, because in some cases you have to fight an environmental injustice for 10, 15, 20 years. It's not like a 2 or 3 month situation where you get into a struggle or you get into an issue and it's settled in 2 or 3 months. If you're going to deal with environmental degradation, it's going to be lengthy and you have to be in for the long haul. Otherwise, you lose credibility, your integrity is lost, and you're going to lose a lot of people along the way, but you're also going to get some support.
But how do you get motivated, and how do you motivate others to do this kind of work? It takes a long time, and we're a quick fix society.
No, and it does take a long time. And I get motivated simply by recognizing that my persistence, or our persistence, the group that I work with, is making progress. And I'll just give you, for instance, as you know, we have been fighting the siting of the Cesar Chavez forever, since before it was built. Well, it's kind of a success now to have, in fact, a Cesar Chavez monitor. That tells you a lot, that if there's a monitor now named after Cesar Chavez, that's a little success there.
What do you mean monitor?
It's an air monitor.
An air monitor,
that monitors for the chemicals that we said are in that community.
So they know how many chemicals they have every day in the air?
Yes, basically.
Oh, that's interesting. What tactics do you favor? You've got community workshops, petitions, public hearings. What do you favor to get the work done that you need to do?
I think we need to do all of those things. We need to do petitions. We need to have workshops. We need to have public forums. And the right people have to come to the meetings. In other words, you need to invite people that can make the decisions to make changes. Because a lot of times what we get is we have what they call talking heads. They just,
we know about that.
Yeah, they just come and, they give you a good speech. They'll tell you they're working on it. They know your concerns, and then that's it.
But nothing happens.
So what we always try to say is, look, come to the table if you're in authority to make decisions.
Okay.
And generally that doesn't happen as often as we would like it to happen.
I was going to say, how do you make them show up? They're going to be under the gun.
Yeah, consistency and pressure. And again, just the challenge of getting the community really organized.
Do you think it's a good idea to use aggressive tactics? Like,
Definitely.
Interrupting appearances by government officials? I mean, that works?
I think it works, again, depending on the circumstances and the situation. In some cases, you have to be very aggressive because you're not getting anywhere, so you want to, be aggressive. But in most cases, if you have the stakeholders involved and you have a genuine community concern about the issues, people with at least in moderation or with a conscience will then start dealing with that issue.
Juan, give me some examples of resources people can turn to if their community's at risk. I mean, where do they start? Let's say I'm someone who lives in this neighborhood. I don't know what to do. What's my first step? Call Juan Parras.
That's what I was going to say. That's the first thing they should do. But they can also call, there's various environmental organizations in the city of Houston.
In every state in Houston.
Yeah, in every state and every county probably has them. But we have several prominent groups here, and one is GAPS, Greater Houston Association for Smog Prevention. And then you have CLEAN, Citizens League for Environmental Action Now. You have Mothers for Clean Air. And then you have us, TEJAS, Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services. But if people do not know of an organization that is willing to accept their challenge or at least answer their questions, they can always call our environmental group.
Right. They can definitely need to get in touch with organizations that are already fighting for the issue. In reading about environmental justice, I can't help but notice the impact women seem to have in grassroots organization. Why do you think women are so passionate about this? It seems to be you have more women fighting these injustices than men.
Well,
even though you're a man.
I was going to say, I hate to differ. No, it's true.
But it's grassroots women.
It has
mainly
been my experience that women are the focal point in making a lot of changes. And I think it's because they're the ones that have to deal with the children on a daily basis. They're the ones that, pick up the kids after school, take them to school. They're the ones that babysit. And so I think that when they're that directly involved with the children and other children, not just their own children, they see that maybe the kids are having too much asthma attacks. They notice that when they're out in playing that they have breathing disorders or their nose or start bleeding or headaches. So I think that being in more contact with the impacted children, that they have a sense of, hey, we need to change this because obviously something's happening.
In recent years, has the electronic media changed the way you do your community activism? Like, do you now go more door to door? Has it changed the way you do your work?
It has changed drastically, but still the best way to organize is to go face to face, one-on-one, block walking, having community meetings. But the electronic media right now is a tremendous boost because you can get hooked up with not only your local community, but you can actually make your issue now a national issue.
Right. Yeah. What do you need to do to keep doing the work that you're doing?
Lots of donations. No. What we need to do to continue what we're doing right now is that we need more people to start being more proactive and join forces with us if they want changes to come about in the Houston and Harris County area, because not one person can do it. You need
takes
somebody.
A group. It takes some grassroots organizing. Right. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about. Right now, as you know, global warming is in the news, and more evidence is coming out that we have a serious problem created by mankind. What are some of the steps that you recommend to help in this?
Well, one of the things that I would recommend, first of all, is that we as a country have to acknowledge that global warming exists, because that's one thing that our U.S. government does not want to pursue or acknowledge. And the other thing is that we need to be aware of the I guess the technology and the film and the scientists that are out there that are now saying we have a global problem. And it's obvious to some of us, because some of us will say, well, look at the hurricanes. They're getting worse than they used to be. Look at the weather changes that are taking place. And so if you can get a link to somehow connect what's happening in your environment versus like maybe 5 or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the older people would tell you, we used to have trees that bore, had fruits, fish that were abundant in the rivers, and now everything is changing. So I think that those changes ought to at least indicate to you that something globally is happening, not just, in your area, but globally.
But at a community level, how do you teach, your everyday knocking on the door, how do you teach people about this? When, people are busy, they have, difficult lives, what do you tell them?
Well, it's very difficult to actually teach somebody about global warming, again, because it's an issue that they have to know about other issues before they can even think about global warming. But what I try to do is I try to educate people as to that everything in this world, it's just one world. And what happens in one part of the country or one part of the world eventually sort of, like they call it trichonomics, it eventually has an impact on other parts of the world and other parts of the country.
Where do you go from here? What do you want to see?
Well, I would hope that one day Houston would have, not the dirtiest air, but one of the cities that has the cleanest air, and that people would be, at least those that are in impacted communities that live next to the chemical plants, that somebody would honestly go out to their communities and say, we need to relocate you. We need to make sure that you're healthy. We need to open up clinics and maybe check out your living situations and provide some kind of service to the impacted communities that are getting sick, every day.
How do you know you're living smart?
How do I know I'm living smart? Well, maybe because I feel that I'm not necessarily living smart, but that I have to do things to at least prolong my life and not get into those kind of things that hurt your system or abuse your body. And it's a difficult question because I hope I'm living right, but we'll see. If I have a long life.
Why do you say you're not living smart? Why do you say you're not living smart?
No, I think I'm living smart.
Yeah,
well,
I think
maybe
you're
longevity
smart.
will prove that. I don't know.
You care for others and you care for yourself. So thank you
course.
so much, Juan Parras, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
Patricia.
you. And you can learn more about Juan Parras by going to our website, houstonpbs.org/livingsmart. There you'll also find a complete resource list, and feel free to share your own views on environmental justice. You can call us with your comments at 713-743-8513 or email livingsmart@houstonpbs.org. And that's our show for today. Remember to live smart. I'm Patricia Gross. Have a carefree week.
Production funding for Living Smart with Patricia Gross is underwritten in part by Halliburton. For a transcript of this program, send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.